I offer a partnership to save your family. It is a contract, not a romance, and it will cost you your hand." Miriam Haskett stared at the most powerful duke in England, the man who commanded Parliament and could destroy her family with a word, as he stood on the frozen ridge of Ashwood, demanding her future in exchange for her father's ruin. She had sacrificed her dowry for her sisters to marry lords, and now she had nothing left to give but her name to a man who promised her everything except love. If you're ready to enjoy this story, click that subscribe button, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The air on the high ridge of Ashwood was sharp and clean, scented with pine and the residual cold of late winter. Below the sprawling, handsome facade of Ashwood Manor, the last asset the Haskett family truly owned, lay dusted with a thin layer of crystalline snow. Miriam Haskett stood exactly where the image placed her, the wind catching the skirt of her gown. The deep sapphire blue of her dress was a stark, vibrant counterpoint to the muted greens and whites of the landscape, much like her quiet strength was a counterpoint to her sister's overt charm. At 29, she was no longer merely unmarried. She was a spinster, a sentinel of duty who had long since accepted her fate. Miriam's gaze swept over the manor, heavy with the weight of her secret. Her younger sisters, Eliza and Nora, had secured their glittering futures by marrying lords, yet their father's reckless handling of the remaining family property had resulted in a devastating quiet crisis, a looming land claim that threatened to strip the family of Ashwood, and worse, their modest respectability. Miriam had saved them once by sacrificing her dowry. She had nothing left to give but her very name. Suddenly, the deep, rhythmic crunch of wheels on the frozen ground broke the silence. A magnificent black-lacquered carriage, too large, too imposing for Ashwood's modest lanes, appeared at the bottom of the ridge. The footmen wore the unmistakable livery of the Duke of Whitlock. A chill, far colder than the winter air, struck Miriam. Grant Ellsworth, the most powerful duke in all of England, stepped from the carriage, tall, impeccably tailored, and radiating an almost palpable energy of absolute authority. He was 33 and utterly without sentiment. He was the man feared by Parliament and courted by kings, and he was staring directly up at her. He ascended the ridge with measured, powerful strides, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He stopped mere feet away, ignoring the cold and the magnificent view, focused only on the woman in the blue dress. "Miss Haskett," he began, his voice low and devoid of preamble, "I am aware of the claim against your family and the precariousness of Ashwood's title. I have the power to stop it and secure your father's future, permanently." Miriam's breath hitched. She knew what this meant. This was not courtship. This was a transaction with the highest power in the realm. The Duke delivered the final, blunt blow. "I offer a partnership to save your family. I require a discreet, capable duchess who will ask nothing of me. It is a contract, not a romance, and it will cost you your hand." Miriam met the formidable gaze of the man who commanded more power than the lords her sisters had married. She was no longer Miriam Haskett, the overlooked spinster. She was merely the currency of her family's salvation, and the future of the house. Her entire life now rested in the strong, cold hand of the Duke. The drawing room at Ashwood Manor had never felt smaller. Grant Ellsworth, Duke of Whitlock, occupied the wingback chair near the fire with the ease of a man who owned far grander rooms than this. Yet his presence, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in charcoal wool and a crisp white cravat, made the modest furnishings seem almost quaint. He had accepted Miriam's invitation to return the following morning to speak with her father, and now, at precisely 10 o'clock, he sat across from the trembling Viscount Haskett, laying out terms with surgical precision. The land claim filed by the Crowley estate is legitimate, the Duke said, his voice even and factual. Your late uncle's debts were transferred with the property deed. Left unchallenged, you will lose Ashwood within the quarter. Viscount Haskett, a man of 56 whose once handsome features had softened with age and worry, paled. He gripped the arm of his chair. Your Grace, there must be some recourse. My solicitor assured me. Your solicitor is incompetent. The Duke's interruption was not cruel, merely accurate. I have already instructed my own man of business to settle the claim in full and to secure the deed in perpetuity under a private trust. Ashwood will remain yours, Viscount, free and clear. Miriam stood near the window, her hands folded carefully at her waist. The same sapphire gown from yesterday, now seeming almost too vibrant for the sombre proceedings. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared herself. Her father's voice cracked with relief. Your Grace, I cannot express my gratitude. The sum must be considerable. I shall repay you, of course. Though it may take time, there will be no repayment. The Duke's gaze shifted, landing on Miriam with the weight of a verdict. I require something else entirely. I require your eldest daughter's hand in marriage. The room went utterly still. The door to the drawing-room opened, and Miriam's sisters entered, summoned by their father's earlier message. Eliza, the eldest of the married daughters at 26, swept in first, her rose-silk day-dress and expertly coiffed hair speaking to her new status as Lady Barnwell. Nora followed, 24, and glowing with the confidence of being the new Countess of Tremont. Both women stopped short at the sight of the Duke. Your Grace, Eliza breathed, dipping into a flawless curtsy. Nora followed suit, her eyes wide with shock. The Duke inclined his head with bare civility, then returned his attention to the Viscount. I am in need of a wife, not for sentiment, but for the practical management of my households and the social stability my position requires. Miss Miriam Haskett possesses the temperament, discretion, and capability I have observed. In exchange for her acceptance, I will resolve your family's financial difficulties entirely. Miriam? Nora's voice was faint. She turned to her eldest sister, confusion and something like pity crossing her delicate features. But surely the Duke jests, Eliza finished, though her tone was more cautious. She looked between Miriam and the formidable man who had just proposed a marriage as one might propose a business merger. Your Grace, forgive me, but Miriam has never... That is, she has not been out in society for several years. Surely there are younger women of greater... I am not seeking youth or beauty, Lady Barnwell. The Duke's voice was cold, cutting through Eliza's poorly concealed shock. I am seeking competence and discretion. Your sister has both. Miriam finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. Eliza, Nora, please. Her sisters fell silent, but their distress was palpable. Eliza twisted her gloved hands. Miriam, you cannot possibly agree to this. A marriage without affection, without what? Miriam's gaze was clear, almost serene. Without the courtship and the season that I funded for both of you. Without the love matches you were free to pursue because I sacrificed my own prospects. Nora flinched as if struck. That is unfair. It is true. Miriam's tone softened, but only slightly. I do not begrudge you your happiness. But do not stand here now and pretend there is any alternative. We could help, Nora said desperately, looking to Eliza. Could we not? Between our households. Eliza's silence was damning. She looked away, her cheeks flushed. Lord Barnwell's estate is entailed. He has little free capital, and after last season's expenses. And Lord Tremont has made it quite clear that the Haskett family difficulties are not his concern, Nora whispered, her voice breaking. He forbade me from offering assistance. Miriam had known. Of course she had known. Her sisters' glittering marriages were still too new, too fragile. They had no power to offer her, no wealth to spare. They had been saved, but they could not save her in turn. She turned to the Duke, whose expression had not changed throughout the exchange. He simply waited, a man accustomed to getting exactly what he required. Your Grace, Miriam said, her voice calm and clear. I accept your proposal. Her father released a shuddering breath of relief. Eliza looked as though she might weep. Nora turned away, her shoulders trembling. The Duke rose to his feet, his tall frame commanding the room. He crossed to Miriam and extended his hand, not in affection, but in formal contract. Then we are agreed, Miss Haskett. I shall procure a special license. The marriage will take place within the week. Miriam placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and utterly impersonal. It is my duty, she said quietly, meeting his unreadable gaze, and I have never failed in my duty. No, the Duke replied, something almost like respect flickering in his dark eyes. I do not believe you have. He released her hand, nodded once to the Viscount, and departed without further ceremony. The room felt cavernous in his absence. Miriam stood by the window, watching the Duke's carriage disappear down the lane. Behind her, her sisters wept softly, and her father murmured prayers of gratitude. She felt nothing but the cold, clear certainty of sacrifice. It was, after all, what she had always done best. The chapel at Ashwood was stone cold and nearly empty. Miriam stood before the altar in a gown of cream silk, elegant, expensive, and purchased by the Duke's own modiste, feeling like a beautifully wrapped parcel being formally transferred from one ledger to another. Her father stood to her left, his relief palpable. Eliza and Nora sat in the front pew, their faces carefully composed, their hands clutched together. The Duke's grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Whitlock, occupied the opposite pew, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her expression inscrutable. Grant Ellsworth stood beside Miriam, tall and immovable in dark superfine and an ivory waistcoat. He spoke his vows in a steady, clear voice, each word a matter of legal record rather than romantic declaration. Miriam repeated hers with equal composure. The vicar's voice echoed in the sparse chapel, and when the final words were spoken, Grant placed a ring on her finger, a heavy gold band set with a flawless sapphire, the Whitlock signet. And it was done. There was no wedding breakfast, no celebration. The Duke handed Miriam into his carriage immediately after the ceremony, nodded once to her father, and gave the order to depart. As the carriage rolled forward, Miriam caught one last glimpse of her sisters standing in the chapel doorway, their figures growing smaller and smaller until the bare trees swallowed them entirely. Inside the carriage, silence reigned. The Duke sat opposite her, his long legs taking up much of the space, his gaze directed out the window. Miriam folded her gloved hands in her lap and watched the countryside roll past. The snow had melted in patches, revealing the dark, rich earth beneath. Spring was coming, though it felt impossibly distant. You may rest if you wish, the Duke said after a long while, his tone neither warm nor cold. The journey is 4 hours. I am not tired, Your Grace. You are the Duchess of Whitlock now. You may call me Whitlock, or Grant, as you prefer." Miriam inclined her head. "Grant, then." He said nothing more, and neither did she. The silence was not uncomfortable, merely factual. Two people bound by contract, travelling toward a life neither had chosen for love. When Whitlock Manor finally came into view, Miriam's breath caught despite herself. The estate was not merely grand, it was vast, intimidating in its sheer scale. The main house stretched across the horizon, all pale stone and towering columns, its countless windows glinting in the late afternoon light. Formal gardens, still dormant from winter, lay in geometric precision around the drive. Beyond, she could see the dark line of a forest and the glint of a distant lake. It was the kind of house that appeared in the background of great portraits, the seat of power for one of England's oldest and most formidable families. "It is magnificent," Miriam said quietly. Grant glanced at the house as though seeing it anew through her eyes. "It is a responsibility," he replied, "as you will soon learn." The carriage swept up the drive, and a small army of liveried servants assembled at the entrance. The butler, a man of advanced years with silver hair and a military bearing, stepped forward as Grant handed Miriam down from the carriage. "Your Grace, welcome home. Your Grace," he said, bowing to Miriam with precise formality. "I am Carrington. The staff is assembled to meet the new Duchess." Miriam stood tall, her hand resting lightly on Grant's arm as he led her past the rows of footmen, maids, and senior staff. Each face was carefully neutral, each pair of eyes assessing the woman who had become their mistress. She met their gazes calmly, acknowledging each with a slight nod, her expression serene. Inside, the entrance hall soared 2 stories high, with a grand staircase sweeping upward beneath a massive chandelier. Marble floors gleamed. Portraits of stern-faced dukes and duchesses lined the walls. It was breathtaking and utterly impersonal. Grant did not pause to let her admire it. He led her directly up the staircase, down a long corridor lined with more portraits, and stopped before a set of double doors. He opened them, revealing a suite of rooms decorated in shades of soft blue and cream. A sitting room, a dressing room visible through an open doorway, and beyond that, the glimpse of a canopied bed. "Your rooms," Grant said simply. He gestured to a second door within the sitting room. "That connects to my suite. It will remain unlocked should you require anything, but I will not intrude upon your privacy." Miriam stepped into the sitting room, taking in the elegant furnishings, the fire already burning in the grate, the vase of hothouse flowers on the writing desk. It was beautiful. It was separate. "I see," she said quietly. Grant stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I meant what I said. Miriam, this is a practical arrangement. You will have your independence here, and I will have mine. I require only that you manage the household and serve as my hostess when society demands it." "I understand." He nodded once, as though satisfied by her composure. "Carrington will introduce you to the housekeeper, Mrs. Dawson, tomorrow morning. She will provide you with the household accounts and staffing records. If you require anything tonight, ring for your lady's maid. She has already unpacked your things." "Thank you." Grant hesitated, just for a moment, as though there were something more to say. Then he simply inclined his head. "Good night, Duchess." "Good night." He withdrew, and the door clicked softly shut behind him. Miriam stood alone in her beautiful, isolated suite, the weight of the Whitlock signet heavy on her finger. The next morning, Miriam met with Mrs. Dawson, a capable woman in her 50s who had managed Whitlock Manor for 2 decades. The housekeeper had arrived prepared to guide the new, inexperienced Duchess through her duties with patient condescension. She was not prepared for Miriam. Within an hour, Miriam had reviewed the household accounts, identified 3 areas of unnecessary expense, and quietly corrected an inefficiency in the rotation of the lower staff. She asked precise, informed questions about the still room, the linen inventory, and the management of the extensive wine cellar. By noon, she had walked the entire house with Mrs. Dawson, committing the layout to memory and greeting each servant by name. When the housekeeper reported to the Duke that afternoon, her tone was markedly different. "Your Grace," Mrs. Dawson said, a note of surprised respect in her voice, "the new Duchess is most capable. I have never seen accounts managed with such efficiency. She has a remarkable head for detail." Grant, seated in his study reviewing correspondence, glanced up. "Does she?" "Indeed, Your Grace, if I may say so. Whitlock Manor has not had such a steady hand in many years." Grant returned his attention to his papers, but the faintest hint of satisfaction touched his features. "Good," he said simply. "That is precisely why I chose her." And in her sitting room, Miriam penned a letter to her father, assuring him that all was well, that the Duke was fair, and that she had found her place. She did not mention the silence, or the separate rooms, or the cold formality of her new life. She had accepted this duty. She would fulfill it with grace. It was, after all, what she had always done. The Dowager Duchess of Whitlock arrived on a Thursday morning in late April, without prior notice, her travelling coach sweeping up the drive as though she owned the very stones beneath its wheels. In truth, Miriam reflected as she watched from the drawing-room window, the woman had owned Whitlock Manor for over 40 years before relinquishing it to her grandson. If anyone had a right to arrive unannounced, it was she. "Her Grace, the Dowager Duchess of Whitlock," Carrington announced, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been warning. The woman who entered was small in stature but immense in presence. She could not have stood more than 5 feet tall, yet she commanded the room as absolutely as her grandson did. Her silver hair was dressed in an older style, elegant and severe. Her gown was black. She had been widowed for 20 years, but cut from silk so fine it whispered with each movement. Her eyes, the same dark, penetrating eyes that Grant possessed, swept the room and landed on Miriam with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. "So," the Dowager said, her voice clipped and aristocratic, "you are the girl who finally got my grandson to the altar." Miriam rose and sank into a flawless curtsy. "Your Grace, welcome to Whitlock Manor." "My Whitlock Manor, child. You have merely been permitted to inhabit it." The Dowager moved to the center of the room, pulling off her gloves with sharp, efficient movements. "Where is Grant?" "Riding the northern estate with his steward, Your Grace. He is expected back within the hour. May I offer you refreshment?" "Tea. And do sit down. I cannot abide people hovering." Miriam rang for tea and settled into the chair opposite the Dowager, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her expression serene. She had managed her father's household through creditors and crisis. She would not be cowed by an elderly woman, no matter how formidable. The Dowager studied her with unnerving intensity. "How old are you?" 29, Your Grace." "And you had no other prospects?" "None that I pursued." "Why not?" Miriam met the sharp gaze steadily. "My family required my dowry for my sister's seasons. I chose to provide it." Martyrdom is an unattractive quality in a young woman. "It was not martyrdom, Your Grace. It was mathematics. 3 futures secured against one. The equation was simple." The faintest flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed the Dowager's features. You are plain-spoken. I find it efficient. And what do you make of my grandson? Miriam paused, choosing her words carefully. I find him intelligent, principled, and fair. He has treated me with respect and has honored every term of our arrangement. Arrangement? The dowager's mouth thinned. What a cold word for a marriage. It is an accurate word for ours, Your Grace. The tea arrived and Miriam poured with practiced grace, preparing the dowager's cup exactly as requested without needing to ask twice. The older woman accepted it with a small nod, then proceeded to interrogate Miriam on every aspect of the household management. The staffing, the accounts, the condition of the linens, the state of the still room, the plans for the kitchen garden. Each question was designed to expose ignorance or incompetence. Miriam answered every single one with calm precision. An hour later, when Grant returned and found his grandmother installed in the drawing room, his expression remained perfectly controlled, but Miriam saw the slight tension in his shoulders. "Grandmother," he said, bowing over her hand, "this is unexpected. I came to meet your wife. Grant, surely you did not think I would stay away indefinitely?" The dowager's eyes glinted. "Though I notice you did not invite me to the wedding." "It was a small affair." "So I heard. How practical." The dowager rose, gathering her shawl. "I shall rest before dinner. Miriam, you will join me in the Rose Salon at 4 o'clock. We have more to discuss." It was not a request. At precisely 4 o'clock, Miriam entered the Rose Salon, a smaller, more intimate drawing room on the eastern side of the manor. The dowager sat beside the window, the afternoon light softening her severe features. She gestured to the chair beside her, not opposite. "Sit, child." Miriam sat, and for a long moment the dowager simply looked at her, the earlier sharpness replaced by something quieter, more assessing. "You handled yourself well this morning," the dowager said finally. "Better than I expected. You did not flinch, and you did not simper. That is rare." "Thank you, Your Grace." "Do you know why Grant married you?" Miriam kept her voice even. "He required a competent wife without romantic expectations. I required security for my family. Our needs aligned. And you believe that is the whole of it?" "I have no reason to believe otherwise." The dowager sighed, a sound that carried decades of weariness. "Then you do not understand him at all. But that is not your fault. Grant ensures no one understands him." She turned to gaze out the window, her profile regal and sad. "My grandson became the Duke at 17. His father died suddenly, a riding accident, and Grant inherited a title, 6 estates and responsibilities that would have crushed a grown man. He was still a boy." Miriam remained silent, sensing the importance of the moment. His mother had died in childbirth when he was 8. He barely remembered tenderness, and when his father died, those who should have guided him, his uncles, his father's friends, saw only an opportunity. They tried to control him, to manipulate the estates for their own benefit. One uncle even attempted to have him declared incompetent so he could seize the guardianship and the fortune that came with it. The dowager's hands tightened on the armrest. Grant learned very young that trust was a luxury he could not afford. That love was a weapon others would use against him. He built walls, Miriam, high and thick, and he has lived behind them ever since. Miriam's chest tightened. She thought of Grant in the library, his careful distance, his controlled warmth, the way he had given her the book but said nothing, the way he kept even kindness at arm's length. "He chose you," the dowager continued. because he believed you would not try to breach those walls, that you would be content with the arrangement and ask nothing more of him. She turned to Miriam, her gaze fierce. "But I am asking you, child. I am asking you to see past his coldness to the man beneath. He will not make it easy. He will not ask for your understanding or your affection. But if you have the strength and the patience, you may find that the fortress he built has a door, and that he desperately wishes someone would find it." Miriam's voice was barely a whisper. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you are the first woman he has brought into this house in 16 years. The first he has trusted enough to bear his name. He may not know it yet, but he did not choose you merely for competence, Miriam. He chose you because somewhere beneath all that ice, he recognized something in you that he needed." The dowager reached out and placed her small, strong hand over Miriam's. "Do not give up on him, and do not let him give up on himself." That evening, Miriam entered the library as usual. Grant was already there, seated at his desk, his dark head bent over a letter. He looked up when she entered, and for the first time, she saw him differently. Not as the cold duke who had purchased her hand, but as the boy who had learned that love was dangerous and had chosen loneliness instead. "Good evening," he said quietly. "Good evening, Grant," she replied. And when she sat down with her book, she chose the chair closer to his desk than she ever had before. He noticed. She saw his eyes flicker to her, a question in them. She simply smiled, opened her book, and began to read. The walls had not come down, but she had found the door, and she would wait. The change in Miriam was subtle, but Grant noticed it within days. She had always been composed, always competent, but now there was something different in the way she occupied space in his home. She no longer simply managed the household, she inhabited it. She began to offer observations rather than waiting to be asked. When he mentioned a problem with drainage on the southern tenant farms during dinner one evening, she did not simply nod politely. She asked questions. "How long has the issue persisted?" she inquired, setting down her wine glass. Grant paused, fork halfway to his mouth. 3 seasons, according to the steward. "And the cost of repair?" "Considerable. The land would need to be regraded, new ditches dug. Simmons estimates £800. Miriam was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. "What is the annual yield from those farms currently?" "Perhaps £200 after expenses." "And if the drainage were corrected?" Grant leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Simmons believes it could double, possibly more. The soil is rich, but it becomes waterlogged each spring. Then the repair pays for itself in 4 years, and every year after that represents pure gain. It is not an expense, Your Grace. It is an investment." She met his eyes calmly. "Unless there is a cash flow issue that makes the initial outlay prohibitive?" There was not. Grant knew there was not. But he had been raised to be cautious with capital, to weigh every expenditure against potential loss. Miriam, in 30 seconds, had cut through his hesitation with perfect clarity. "You are correct," he said slowly. "I will instruct Simmons to proceed." She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. "I am glad. It seemed a shame to let good land languish for want of ditches." After that, Grant began to seek her opinion as a matter of course. When a dispute arose between 2 tenant families over boundary lines, he asked Miriam to review the historical property maps. Her eye for detail was sharper than his steward's. When the housekeeper requested funds to update the servants' quarters, Grant brought the proposal to Miriam first. She walked the quarters herself, spoke to the staff, and returned with a revised budget that was both more economical and more comprehensive than the original. Mrs. Dawson focused on the immediacy, Miriam explained, spreading the plans across Grant's desk in the library one evening. But the real issue is the chimney in the western wing. It smokes badly and makes half the rooms uninhabitable in winter. If we address that first, we can reduce the number of rooms needing other repairs. Grant examined her notes. Neat, methodical, thoroughly researched. How did you discover the chimney issue? I asked the maids. Miriam's tone was matter-of-fact. They are the ones who live there. It seemed logical to consult them. He looked up at her, standing beside his desk in a day dress of soft grey wool, her hair pinned simply, her expression earnest. She was not trying to impress him. She was simply capable, thoughtful. She saw problems he had overlooked and solutions he had not considered, not because she was cleverer than he, but because she approached the world differently. She listened. She noticed. Implement your plan, he said quietly. And Miriam? Yes? Thank you. The smile she gave him then was worth more than he cared to examine. The evenings in the library evolved as well. They still read, but now the silence was punctuated by conversation. A question about a passage. A comment on the day's estate business. A shared observation about the absurdity of the London papers. Grant found himself waiting for those moments. The sound of her voice. The quick intelligence in her eyes when she debated a point with him. One evening in early May, when the windows were open to the soft spring air, and the scent of early roses drifted in from the gardens, Grant rose from his desk and crossed to the shelves. He reached up to the highest shelf on the gallery and retrieved a small volume wrapped in cloth. He returned to where Miriam sat reading and placed it on the table beside her chair. She looked up, surprised. What is this? Open it. Miriam carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small leather-bound book. The leather was old, burnished to a deep burgundy, and the title was stamped in faded gold. Letters of Abelard and Heloise. She opened it with reverent care. The pages were yellowed with age, the text in Latin, with handwritten notes in the margins in a delicate, archaic script. It is a first edition, Grant said quietly, watching her face. Printed in 1616. The marginalia are believed to be from a French scholar, though no one knows for certain. I acquired it at auction 2 years ago. Miriam's fingers trembled as she turned the pages. Grant, this is extraordinary. You mentioned Heloise last week, when we were discussing medieval philosophy. You said you admired her intellect, her refusal to be diminished by the limitations placed on women of her era. He paused, his voice softer. I thought you might like to read her words in their original form. Miriam looked up at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper, something that looked almost like wonder. This is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received, she said, her voice unsteady. Thank you. Grant inclined his head, suddenly uncertain what to do with his hands. I am glad it pleases you. It does. Very much. He should have returned to his desk. Instead, he sat in the chair opposite hers, the one he had occupied only once before, the night they first truly spoke. Will you read it aloud? He asked. My Latin is serviceable, but yours is better. It was true. He had heard her murmuring translations to herself on occasion, her pronunciation flawless. Miriam's smile was radiant. I would be honored. She read to him as the light faded and the candles were lit, her voice soft and melodic, translating the passionate intellectual letters of two lovers separated by fate and circumstance. Grant listened, watching the firelight play across her face, and realized with startling clarity that the walls he had spent 16 years building were crumbling, not with violence, not with force, but with quiet, persistent grace, with books and conversations, and the simple, steady presence of a woman who asked nothing of him except that he be himself. When she finally closed the book, the hour was late. Neither of them moved. "Miriam," Grant said, his voice low. "Yes, I am grateful for your counsel, for your partnership." He hesitated, the words foreign on his tongue. "For your company." She set the book aside and leaned forward slightly, her eyes searching his. "As am I, Grant, more than I can express." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things unspoken, things neither was quite ready to name. Grant rose and extended his hand to her. "It is late. Allow me to escort you to your rooms." Miriam placed her hand in his, and he drew her to her feet. They walked together through the quiet corridors, their footsteps echoing softly. When they reached her door, he did not immediately release her hand. "Sleep well, Miriam. And you, Grant." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Brief, formal, but his eyes held hers as he did so. Then he released her and walked to his own door, his heart beating harder than it had in years. Behind her closed door, Miriam touched her fingers to her lips and smiled. The fortress was crumbling indeed, and she was no longer waiting outside. She was within the walls, and he had invited her there himself. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late May, when the gardens at Whitlock Manor were finally in full bloom, and the library windows stood open to admit the scent of lilacs. Miriam was reviewing the week's menus with Mrs. Dawson when Carrington brought the post on a silver tray. Among the usual correspondence, invitations, estate business, letters from her father expressing continued gratitude, was a letter sealed with the Barnwell crest. Eliza. Miriam opened it with mild curiosity. Her sister wrote infrequently, usually brief notes about social engagements or her children's minor accomplishments. But this letter was different. The handwriting was rushed, the ink blotted in places, and the tone was urgent. "Dearest Miriam, I write to you with great distress, though I fear this news will pain you. There is talk in London, terrible, malicious talk, regarding your marriage to the Duke, and it is being whispered in every drawing-room that His Grace married you not out of any regard, but solely to acquire the land rights attached to our mother's family. Apparently, there is some obscure claim to a northern property that passed through our maternal line, and it is said the Duke required it for some strategic purpose. The gossips say your marriage is a complete facade, that you and the Duke maintain entirely separate lives, and that he chose you precisely because you would never presume to expect affection or fidelity from a man so far above your station. Miriam, I would dismiss this as mere jealous speculation, but the rumours are being actively encouraged by Lady Portia Ashcroft. You may not know the name, but she is a widow of considerable influence, and it is well known that she and the Duke were once close. She has been telling anyone who will listen that the Duke is incapable of genuine attachment and that your marriage is proof of his cold, calculating nature. I am so sorry, dearest. I do not know what to do, but I felt you must be warned. Your loving sister, Eliza Miriam, read the letter twice, her hands perfectly steady, though something cold and sharp had lodged itself in her chest. She folded the letter carefully and set it aside, then dismissed Mrs. Dawson with the usual courtesy. Only when she was alone did she allow herself to feel the full weight of it. Strategic land rights, a facade, a woman of no consequence, chosen precisely because she would never expect more. The cruelest part was how plausible it sounded, how closely it matched the original terms of their arrangement. How easily society could believe that a man like Grant would never truly choose a woman like her for any reason beyond convenience. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the gardens she had come to love, the estate she had learned to manage, the life she had begun, foolishly perhaps, to believe might hold more than duty. Miriam. She turned to find Grant standing in the doorway. He must have just returned from his morning ride. His boots were dusty, his dark hair slightly windblown. His eyes went immediately to the letter on the table, then to her face. What has happened? She could have dissembled. She could have claimed nothing was wrong. But they had built something in these weeks together. Honesty, if nothing else. A letter from my sister, she said quietly. It seems London society has formed opinions about our marriage. Grant's expression hardened. He crossed the room in 3 strides and picked up the letter, reading it with swift, focused intensity. When he finished, his jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. Portia, he said, the name emerging like a curse. Lady Ashcroft is known to you, then. Grant's eyes met hers, and she saw anger there. Not at her, but on her behalf. She is. We were acquainted some years ago. She had expectations I did not share. When I made that clear, she did not accept it with grace. She says you are incapable of genuine attachment. Miriam kept her voice level, though the words cut. That you chose me precisely because I would never expect it. And you believe her? The question was sharp, almost challenging. Miriam considered it with the same careful thought she gave everything. I believe, she said slowly, that our marriage began as a transaction. I believe that society sees only what it expects to see, a powerful duke and an unremarkable spinster, bound by convenience rather than choice. And I believe that Lady Ashcroft is using that perception to wound you by humiliating me. Grant set the letter down and moved toward her, his presence filling the space between them. You did not answer my question. Do you believe I am incapable of attachment? That this, he gestured between them, is merely a facade? Miriam looked up at him, at the man who had given her books and sought her counsel, who had kissed her hand and sat beside her in the firelight, the man whose walls had slowly, quietly begun to crumble. No, she said firmly. I do not believe that. Something in Grant's expression shifted, the hard edges softening. Good, because it is a damned lie, and I will not allow it to stand. What do you propose? We go to London, together. His voice was resolute, brooking no argument. The season is not yet over. We will take our place in society as Duke and Duchess, and we will silence this slander through our presence and our united front. Miriam felt a flutter of anxiety. Grant, I have not been in London society for years. I do not have the wardrobe, the connections. You are the Duchess of Whitlock. That is the only connection that matters. He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and sure. And you will have a wardrobe befitting your station. I should have seen to it already. I am not afraid of gossip, Miriam said, though her heart was beating faster. But I am afraid of becoming a liability to you. If society believes what it is told to believe, and I will tell them, in no uncertain terms, that you are my wife, my partner, and that any slight against you is a slight against me. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture that had become familiar and dear. Portia seeks to prove I cannot love, that I chose you as a mere convenience. She will be proven spectacularly wrong. Miriam's breath caught. "Grant, I will not have you diminished, Miriam. Not by Portia's malice, not by society's small-mindedness, not by anyone." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "We will face them together, as we have faced everything else. And when we are done, there will be no doubt in anyone's mind about the nature of our marriage." She should ask him what he meant. She should ask him to clarify, to define the nature he spoke of. But the words would not come. Instead, she simply nodded. "Then we go to London. We leave within the week. I will send word ahead to open Whitlock House and prepare the stuff." He had not released her hand, and she had not pulled away. "You will need a lady's maid familiar with London fashion. I will engage one. And you will need gowns, many of them. I will send for Madame Bisset. She is the finest modiste in London." "Grant, the expense is irrelevant. You are the Duchess of Whitlock, and you will look the part." His voice softened slightly. "Besides, I find I have a vested interest in seeing you silenced in the most spectacular fashion possible." A small smile tugged at Miriam's lips despite her anxiety. Revenge through superior tailoring, among other things. The air between them seemed charged, full of unspoken words and possibilities. Grant lifted her hand to his lips once more, but this time the kiss lingered, his eyes never leaving hers. "We will weather this, Miriam. I promise you." "Together?" she asked softly. "Together," he confirmed. And for the first time since reading Eliza's letter, Miriam believed it might be true. Whitlock House stood on Berkeley Square, a testament to generations of ducal power rendered in pale stone and soaring columns. When the carriage bearing the Duke and Duchess of Whitlock arrived on a Thursday afternoon in early June, half the square seemed to take notice. Curtains twitched in neighboring windows. Footmen paused in their duties. The ton, it appeared, had been waiting. Miriam stepped down from the carriage into the bright London sunlight, acutely aware of the eyes upon her. She wore a travelling dress of deep emerald silk, one of the many gowns Madame Bisset had created in a flurry of activity at Whitlock Manor, and her hair was dressed in a style far more sophisticated than she had ever attempted before. Her new lady's maid, Marie, had worked magic that morning. Grant descended behind her, his hand coming to rest at the small of her back, a gesture of possession and protection that did not go unnoticed by the watching servants and passers-by. "Steady," he murmured, for her ears alone. "You are the Duchess of Whitlock. They should be nervous of you, not the reverse." Miriam lifted her chin and allowed him to guide her up the steps and into the house. The London staff, assembled in the grand entrance hall, bowed and curtsied with meticulous precision. The butler, a distinguished man named Morrison, welcomed them with the same formal deference Carrington employed at the manor. "Your Graces, the house is prepared. Lady Telford sent a note this morning. She requests the honour of your presence at her soirée tomorrow evening, and Lady Ashcroft called yesterday to leave her card." Grant's expression did not change, but Miriam felt the slight tension in his hand. "You may return Lady Ashcroft's card with our compliments and no commitment. Accept Lady Telford's invitation. We will attend." "Very good, Your Grace." That evening, as Marie dressed Miriam's hair and helped her into a dinner gown of ivory silk with delicate silver embroidery, Miriam studied her reflection and barely recognized herself. She looked like a duchess. She looked like she belonged. But would London society agree? The answer came swiftly. Lady Telford's soirée was one of the premier events of the late season, her drawing rooms filled with the most influential members of the ton. When the footman announced, His Grace, the Duke of Whitlock, and Her Grace, the Duchess of Whitlock, the room did not fall silent. That would have been too obvious. but Miriam felt the shift in attention like a physical force. Grant led her into the room with absolute confidence, his hand wrapped around hers, his bearing that of a man who owned not just the title, but the very air he breathed. Miriam wore a gown of sapphire silk that echoed the striking blue of the dress from that first day on the snowy hill. Madame Bisset had insisted on the color, claiming it brought out the clarity of her eyes and the creaminess of her skin. The gown was cut in the latest fashion, the silk shimmering with each step, and around her throat she wore the Whitlock sapphires, a necklace Grant had presented to her before they left the house. "They were my mother's," he had said quietly, fastening the clasp himself. "They suit you." Now, as they moved through the crowd, Miriam felt the weight of the jewels and the weight of every assessing gaze. Grant introduced her to his acquaintances with unwavering courtesy, his hand never leaving the small of her back, his manner making it abundantly clear that she was not an afterthought or a convenience. But his Duchess, in truth, they had been there perhaps half an hour when Miriam saw her. Lady Portia Ashcroft was beautiful in the way that society rewarded, blonde, poised, and dressed in a gown of rose silk that must have cost a fortune. She stood at the centre of a circle of influential women, including the Duchess of Marlborough and Lady Jersey, one of the patronesses of Almack's. When her eyes landed on Miriam, they glittered with something cold and calculating. She moved toward them with the grace of a predator. "Whitlock," she said, her voice warm and familiar as she approached. "How unexpected to see you in London. I had heard you were quite content to rusticate in the country these days." Grant's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Lady Ashcroft, may I present my wife, the Duchess of Whitlock. Miriam, Lady Portia Ashcroft." Portia's smile was sharp as glass. "Your Grace, what a charming gown. So refreshingly modest. One can always tell when a woman is unaccustomed to London fashion." The insult was delicate, delivered with a smile, but it landed precisely as intended. Miriam felt the eyes of the surrounding guests turn toward her, waiting to see how the new, unknown Duchess would respond to a cut from one of society's established beauties. Miriam met Portia's gaze calmly. "How kind of you to say, Lady Ashcroft. I confess, I find London fashion rather exhausting. So much effort to achieve what some possess naturally." It was a gentle parry, but Portia's eyes narrowed. Before she could respond, Grant spoke, his voice carrying easily to the assembled listeners. "I find my wife's taste impeccable, Portia. But then, she has always possessed a quality you would find foreign. Genuine elegance requires no effort when it is inherent." A flicker of shock crossed Portia's features. Grant had just, with perfect courtesy, implied that her beauty was labored and Miriam's was natural. The insult was devastating precisely because it was wrapped in a compliment to his wife. Portia recovered quickly, her smile brittle. "How gallant, Whitlock! Though I must confess I am surprised by your sudden marriage. So unlike you to act impulsively. One might almost think it was driven by necessity rather than affection." The words hung in the air. This was the crux of her attack. The insinuation that Grant had married for strategy, not love, and that Miriam was merely a useful tool. Grant's expression did not change, but his hand moved from Miriam's back to her waist, drawing her closer to his side in a gesture of unmistakable intimacy. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but utterly clear. "On the contrary, Portia, it was the least impulsive decision of my life. I spent years observing the shallow theatrics of London society, waiting for a woman of genuine substance and intelligence. When I found her, I acted with absolute certainty. He looked down at Miriam, and the warmth in his eyes was not feigned. I have never been more certain of anything. Miriam's breath caught. She stared up at him, and for a moment the crowded drawing room ceased to exist. Portia's face had gone pale, then flushed. She opened her mouth to respond, but Lord Pemberton, one of the most respected peers in the realm, stepped forward from the edge of the circle. "Well said, Whitlock," Pemberton declared, his voice booming with approval. "About time someone in this damn city married for sense instead of spectacle. Your Grace," he turned to Miriam with a courtly bow, "my wife would be honored to make your acquaintance. She has been saying for years that London needs more women of intellect and fewer featherheads." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd, laughter directed not at Miriam, but at the absurdity of Portia's insinuation. The Duchess of Marlborough stepped forward next, offering Miriam a gracious smile. "Indeed, you must call on me, Your Grace. I am hosting a literary salon next week, and I believe you would find the company much to your liking." One by one, the influential members of the circle turned toward Miriam with welcome, and away from Portia with cool dismissal. Grant had not raised his voice. He had not been cruel. He had simply, with perfect precision, made it clear where his loyalty lay and dared anyone to question it. Portia, her carefully constructed attack crumbling around her, managed a stiff curtsy and retreated, her rose silk gown disappearing into the crowd. Grant leaned down, his lips close to Miriam's ear. "Are you well?" Miriam looked up at him, her heart pounding, her hand trembling slightly in his. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." "I meant every word," he said quietly, and she believed him. As they moved through the rest of the evening, accepting introductions and invitations, Miriam realized that something fundamental had shifted. Grant had not merely defended her. He had claimed her, publicly and irrevocably, in front of the very society that had doubted them. And when they returned to Whitlock House that night, and he kissed her hand at her chamber door, with a lingering warmth that spoke of more than duty, Miriam knew that the fortress had not just crumbled, it had opened. The note arrived 3 days after Lady Telford's soirée, delivered by a footman in unmarked livery. Miriam found it on the silver tray in the morning room, nestled among the usual calling cards and invitations. The handwriting was elegant, the paper expensive, but there was no signature, only an address in Mayfair and a time, 3 o'clock. "If you wish to know the truth about the man you married, come alone." Miriam should have shown it to Grant immediately. She should have dismissed it as the desperate manipulation it clearly was, but some stubborn part of her, the part that had spent years managing crises and protecting her family, wanted to face this herself. To prove, perhaps, that she was not merely Grant's sheltered duchess, but a woman capable of defending what was hers. She told Marie she was calling on the Duchess of Marlborough. She took the smaller carriage and only one footman. And at precisely 3 o'clock, she arrived at the elegant townhouse on Upper Brook Street. Lady Portia Ashcroft received her in a drawing-room decorated in shades of cream and gold, expensive and cold. She did not rise when Miriam entered, merely gestured to the chair opposite with a languid hand. "How good of you to come, Your Grace. I was not certain you would have the courage." Miriam sat, her posture perfect, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Your note suggested you had information regarding my husband. I am here to listen." Portia's smile was sharp. How admirably direct. "I can see why Grant chose you. No messy emotions, no inconvenient expectations. A perfect business arrangement. If you brought me here merely to repeat gossip, Lady Ashcroft, you have wasted both our time." "I brought you here," Portia said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to something almost intimate, "to save you from the humiliation of believing his lies. Grant Ellsworth is incapable of love, Your Grace. I know this because I spent 2 years trying to reach whatever heart he might possess, and I can assure you there is nothing there. Only ambition, duty, and ice. Miriam's expression did not change. And yet, he did not marry you. Portia's eyes flashed. Because I made the mistake of wanting more than he was willing to give. I expected affection, fidelity, a true partnership. He made it abundantly clear that such things were beneath him, that marriage would only ever be a strategic alliance. And then, years later, he married you, a provincial spinster with no connections and no beauty. And suddenly he plays the devoted husband? She laughed, bitter and cold. He is lying to you, or worse, to himself. Perhaps he believes he cares for you. But I promise you, the moment you become inconvenient, the moment you expect too much, he will show you the same cold dismissal he showed me. Are you finished? Miriam's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the silk. Portia blinked, thrown by the lack of reaction. You do not believe me. I believe you wanted something from Grant that he could not give you. I believe you mistook his honesty for cruelty because it did not align with your expectations. And I believe you have summoned me here because seeing him happy with another woman is unbearable to you. Happy? Portia's voice rose. You think he is happy? You think this is real? My dear, foolish girl, he married you because you asked for nothing, because you were safe. The moment you dare to want more, the moment you expect his heart, he will retreat behind those walls and leave you as alone as I was. Then it is fortunate, Miriam said, rising to her feet with calm dignity, that I did not marry him for passion or pretty words. I married him for exactly what he offered, partnership, honesty, and respect. And in the weeks since, I have found something far more valuable than the fleeting infatuation you seem to prize. I have found a man who listens, who values my counsel, who sees me as an equal rather than an ornament. You call that cold, Lady Ashcroft. I call it the foundation of genuine love. Portia stood as well, her composure cracking. You know nothing of what passed between us. The secrets we shared, the intimacy. I know that whatever you shared, he chose to end it. And I know that he chose me, not because I demanded nothing, but because he trusted me with everything, his home, his reputation, his name. Miriam's voice was steady, implacable. You speak of his inability to love as though it were fact. But perhaps, Lady Ashcroft, the problem was never his capacity to love. Perhaps it was simply that he could not love you. The words struck like a slap. Portia went white, then red, her hands trembling. Get out! Gladly. Miriam moved toward the door, then paused, looking back. I am sorry you were hurt. Truly. But I will not allow your pain to poison what Grant and I have built. Good day, Lady Ashcroft. She walked out with her head high, her hands steady, though her heart was racing. The footman handed her into the carriage, and only when the door closed behind her did she allow herself to tremble. She returned to Whitlock House to find Grant in his study, pacing like a caged animal. He spun toward her the moment she entered, his face a mixture of fury and fear. Where the devil have you been? Morrison said you went to call on the Duchess of Marlborough, but her butler sent word an hour ago that you never arrived. Miriam, I have had half my staff searching. He stopped, his eyes narrowing as he took in her expression. What happened? She could have lied, but they had built their bond on honesty. I received a note from Lady Portia. She requested a private meeting. I went. Grant's expression went from fear to cold rage in an instant. You went alone to meet Portia? Miriam, what were you thinking? I was thinking that I am not a porcelain doll to be protected, and that if someone threatens our marriage, I have a right to face them. And what did she say? His voice was dangerously quiet. She said you were incapable of love, that you had made that clear to her years ago, and that any affection you show me is a performance or a delusion. She attempted to use secrets from your past as weapons. Miriam met his gaze steadily. I told her she was wrong. Grant stared at her, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled emotion. Miriam, I told her that whatever you could not give her, you have given me. That our partnership, built on honesty and respect, is worth more than 1,000 passionate affairs built on illusion. She stepped closer to him. I told her that you chose me, and that I trust that choice. For a long moment, Grant said nothing. Then, with 2 strides, he closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. She was right about one thing, he said, his voice rough. I could not love her. I could not love anyone, for years. I thought I had carved that capacity out of myself entirely. And then you stood on that snowy hill in your blue dress, looking at me like I was merely a man rather than a title, and something I thought long dead began to wake. Miriam's breath caught. Grant, my heart, Miriam, is no longer my own. It resides with you. His thumb brushed her cheek, his eyes searching hers. It has for weeks now, perhaps from the very beginning. I was simply too much a coward to name it. But I am naming it now. I love you, not as a convenience, not as a strategy. I love you because you are brilliant and brave, and you see me, truly see me, and you do not flinch. Tears pricked at Miriam's eyes. I see you, she whispered, and I love what I see. I love you, Grant Ellsworth. He kissed her then, not with the restrained courtesy of their previous interactions, but with the fierce, certain passion of a man who had finally lowered his walls. Miriam kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, years of loneliness and sacrifice melting away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. No more meetings with Portia. No more facing danger alone. We are a partnership, remember? Miriam smiled, radiant and free. Together. Together, he confirmed. Always. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.